the modern community manager role will really change is if you're successful, you'll know when you start to like really have a team. So don't pigeonhole yourself either into like the who unless you're
Yeah.
super crystal clear on like the who and the like so what for that very, very, very specific who. And then everything else you do has to be to that like level.
Super. Thank you so much, Joel, for agreeing to do this conversation and being on Community Deep Dive with us. I think you are one of the folks that have been connected on LinkedIn for long, but this is the first time we have come across on this conversation and like on a face-to-face meeting. So glad that we're doing this.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Super. Joel, actually, I would want to first know before we get into all the aspects of the community work that you have done in your journey. I would actually want to know who is Joel outside of work and how do friends and family know you? Are they also calling you the community professional or who is Joel outside of work?
Yeah. It's funny. I talk about myself some, at least like some of the main things that I do and like hobbies outside of work still on LinkedIn, because I really blend the two. So at least some of the like the big things that I do outside of work are like traveling, running and working out, um, going to concerts, music festivals. Like I think I went to one almost every other weekend this past summer. I definitely posted about a few on LinkedIn with like little clips and whatnot, especially a set or like a snippet from a set that I saw where it was like the Barbie song, because it was having like a moment this summer. So those are a few things um, about who I am. I definitely hope my friends and family think much more of me than just like a community professional because there's a lot more to me than just my work, even though that to at least people on LinkedIn, maybe that's the majority of what you see of me. There is a lot more. So yeah, hopefully my friends and family think more of me than just a community pro. But equally, if that's what they think of me and like that's what it is, then it's good. So at least my personal brand building is doing its job.
I have a, I have very similar interest, and I have a personal challenge that I sometimes face because when you are building a community, you are connected to hundreds of professionals, right? And then let's say you're going on a travel trip with your friends. Do you sometimes feel exhausted by too much socializing out there? And you can like reject to answer this question if you want to, but I'm just asking this from my perspective that sometimes I feel okay, I have work at workplace also. It's just too much socializing, and in person also it's too much socializing sometimes. Do you feel the same?
Uh, I don't know. Usually I'm pretty good about it. Um, I'll say that I'll have moments where I'm definitely like, okay, I need a break. I need me time.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm pretty good about those and planning like that time in for myself. For example, I'm about to start like traveling a bunch over these next few weeks. Um, but after that, I'm like hiding from the world, going back into my like periodic Zoom calls with people and going back into my routine of like working out, running while I still can, hopefully outside along the lakefront while it's nice here in Chicago, and just like all those sorts of things. Hopefully, some concerts and like sets too. I'll be able to like get into before the holidays and whatnot, but otherwise, not really. I try and be up for like as much as I like can take. But if I
Yeah.
can't, then like I also am very much okay with myself being like, Joel, you need to give yourself permission not to go because you need time to like take care of yourself, decompress, have a night in, or like say no to going to something and like go for a run. Like you need to do that.
Yeah.
So I just try and like take it in like a balanced stride and deal, I guess.
Glad. Thanks for answering that. Um, Without taking much time, and I have a lot of questions that I want to ask you. Um, I actually like heard your recent episode of the community-led growth podcast, and it's phenomenal. And we'll also link the podcast in the description of this episode. But I actually wanted to ask you something. Where imagine if somebody was listening to this, a creator or a brand, if they're running a podcast themselves and they want to start a community, like what would be a 3-step or a 5-step like framework to start a community from a podcast show?
Yeah. If that's your goal, have that goal in mind before you start the show, and then have your show be around a unique point of view. Like, I would definitely say that, because otherwise all you're doing is creating great content, yeah, but then like what's the thread that's like what are people feeling emotionally connected to like bring them back and like further along in the journey and like want to like see where this goes next. The next from a podcast in this case is the community. Like, why would someone want to go into the community from the podcast if they don't feel truly emotionally connected to the point of view, the style of the show, all of those sorts of things? So I definitely be mindful of like the goal of the podcast. At least for my podcast, mine is just purely fun. I have no interest in like starting a community. There are plenty of communities for community professionals already. They're great. They're phenomenal. I don't need to do anything different. So that's not my goal, but I would definitely start there. I would equally say like, listen, don't build, just like listen. And if you think you've listened enough, listen 5 times more. Like, you can never talk to enough people to learn what's going to be helpful for them. And especially if you're thinking like you want to solve a pain for finance, hypothetically, just because the economic buyer of whatever you're selling or your service, is the like CFO or VP of finance at the company, doesn't mean that you shouldn't also be building relationships and learning from those who are like underneath them in their organization and therefore in the broader like finance function. So don't pigeonhole yourself either into like the who, unless you're super crystal clear on like the who and the like so what for that very, very, very specific who. And then everything else you do has to be to that like level, especially if you're thinking like, we're only going to create a community for C-suite. Well, that's awesome. Like, it's a very specific who that now you have to figure out like the why and like the so what behind it. Then you have to remember that like these are busy executives. Everything you do has to be done in like a great experience, super smooth, super easy, like yes, no questions, get tons of value out of experiences that you all are putting on, all of those sorts of things. It can't be something where like they have to do a lot of work because they're busy, they're not gonna do it. Yeah. So just be mindful, really.
Yeah. And actually, this is like a great connect for the next question that I have, and I want to spend some time on this one because I have closely observed Lattice's community resources for humans, and you have been the person, of course, the team also behind the success of this community. What did you do differently that led to the success of this? Or is it like, okay, somebody else would have also like this done the exact same things and they would have succeeded? But what is something that Joel did that led to the success of this community?
Yeah, I don't think that there's ever going to be a silver bullet anywhere in community. If anyone does think that, send me a DM because I'd love to know it. But I'll be waiting, I think, a very long time for that. So I'll say like one of the things that I think led us to be very successful even during my like 10 months or so there before I was impacted by a layoff, was the ability for us to really focus on and create a psychologically safe space for our members. People say, or at least I've heard others who are community professionals as well as just like professionals overall, say that like communities that are super large aren't valuable. And don't get me wrong, like I've been in some communities that are very large and I've left them, super fast too. But just because that's your experience in some communities doesn't mean it's consistently the same across. And that's firsthand what I really got to witness at Lattice, was how we really prioritize creating like a psychologically safe space and building trust with the members, to where even by the time I left, it was over 19,000 global members. Since then, they've passed 20. But we had a thriving, super healthy, super active Slack workspace as the conversational element of our community ecosystem. And there was barely any moderation in terms of people breaking rules. It was really like us helping answer members' questions or connecting them to resources from peers, or connecting them to peers to help who we knew might be able to assist them with that question or provide advice for that scenario that they were looking for guidance on. So that would be my like creme de la creme of all things I think I really took away from my time there, is building trust and creating like a psychological safe space is invaluable.
Yeah. And I think I'm just thinking about why I'm part of certain communities is because I actually feel that trust and the psychological safety, let that be a smaller community of, let's say, 200 or 1,000 folks, or the larger communities as well. And I think as a member, you really want that. You don't want people to judge you, or, that safe space should exist for every member. And that's actually like very true. And a learning for all the community builders who are going to listen to this. I actually, when you mentioned about that you have a few weeks of travel coming ahead, is this the same thing, the city tours that you are doing that I think you recently posted on your LinkedIn as well? What are those city tours?
Yeah, exactly. So I'll be leaving for San Francisco and then San Diego. I have a brief like break for something like 30 hours maybe here in Chicago. And then I turn around and I'm off to New York and then Boston, and then wrapping up the 5-city tour that you mentioned, with a stop here in Chicago. You got to bring it back home where it all started. So very excited to be working with Common Room in partnership on the Making Memories Tour 2023. So hitting 5 cities in 4 weeks across 3 time zones within the US.
I'm sure there's going to be an adventure in the coming few weeks.
I mean, it'll definitely be an adventure, but also I'm just really looking forward to it. I'll be able to like have one-on-one coffees with people who won't be able to attend an event. I'm able to attend other events and conferences. It's just like meeting, and then also having the downtime in those cities to explore. I'm just so excited. Like in New York City, I always stay in like my favorite neighborhood, and I'm already planning my like little run over the weekend. Like my life is going to be pretty set and I'm excited for it. So all that we really need is just to make sure that everyone else has a good time, and it'll be a big success. So really looking forward to it. Yeah.
We wish you all the best with that. I'm sure everybody who's going to attend this, they're going to enjoy this.
That's the goal.
I have actually been connected to, as I said, since quite some time on LinkedIn, and I had seen this hiring template that you had collaborated on with Laura, and that got me into thinking about how the roles of a community manager or a community associate or a community lead has like evolved in the past few years. Like, for example, and I was also chatting with Kyle about this, that initially social media and content skills were like really, really important for any community manager. I think then came that, okay, event marketing and event hosting would also be like that important skill set that's required. But what have you observed as how have these roles evolved in the past few years, and how do you see the community manager or a builder in the year 2023?
Yeah, I think successful ones are strategic, not just tactical. They have to be able to educate and be able to honestly like connect with on multiple levels of executives and like leaders to share and bring the executives along on the journey of how we're showing proof and value for the business. So that's really like the strategic side. In terms of, as you said, some of the more like tactical things of what may be included in a community manager's like role, or where do I think it's going, I would say I'm really bullish on the idea of, if you have a really successful community, depending on what type of community you're building, you could start to truly build out something that resembles like a mini marketing team and almost honestly a little business within your company, because you still might need like a program manager or a strategy and operations professional for some of the more technical things and larger road mapping projects and initiatives. You might need a content person who might collaborate closely with your marketing team's content on how your community content is going to be different yet fit into the overall narrative and like goals of the business. You might have your own events and user group program or meetup program manager to specifically own community events, whether they're for customers or customers and prospects, whatever the audience. I can see that really being like a core function too. And then as always, like there has to be someone who is a little bit more strategic and senior with like lots of years of experience to be able to bring all of those separate individuals who are owning specific areas or programs within community together under a shared mission and set of goals that all align back up to business outcomes, while also creating like meaningful experiences and value for members of the community. So I'd say that's how I think the modern community manager role will really change is if you're successful, you'll know when you start to like really have a team. And I think that we're seeing it definitely with some companies, and the companies who have tried once or multiple times, I don't know what went wrong, but something did. So yeah.
And like before even like this team shapes up, how do you really convince your CEO or the leadership or the board to invest in community? Because this is a long journey, right? I mean, it's not just like, okay, we announced today that we're launching a community of creators or HR professionals, and of course all the people from the world are just joining you, and you're getting that return on your investment and all those things. What are some of the best ways to convince your CEO that we should invest in community building?
I mean, I personally would think that it's a hybrid. Like you as the community professional have to have your own ideas around how you take what you're learning during the interview process and distill that down into, based on what I'm hearing and learning throughout the process, this one goal or these 2 to 3 main goals or areas of focus would be how I imagined success for this role being measured. And then having a conversation with your leadership team from there. I would equally say that if your leadership team can't articulate already why, even from a somewhat higher business level, and this is what I mean when I said earlier, like someone who's strategic and can speak and connect with executives, this is part of where that comes in. Because if someone just says, we want community to support customer success, adoption, and NRR. Great. Do you know what adoption, NRR, and growth means and like success? If you don't know those like things, you're automatically kind of set up from behind the gate, like you're getting like held down by like a rock after the gun goes off to start the race. So that's why I think that that's super important. But beyond that, if they can articulate something high level that then you can take and synthesize into very clear things, and then also a key part of this is like, do we need to create net new reporting? Do we need new tools to be able to measure these things? Or can we do that today? And then you just have to have, again, like an honest conversation about then that part, because you don't want to say, here are the goals, but we have no way to measure them. Like, then what's the point? I have no clue. You would be chasing your tail around in a circle like a dog, and it would drive me, at least personally, nutty. So, yeah.
Okay, so we've learned how to, what are like the steps to build a community, what's the framework for this, how do you convince a CEO as well. But there's a new trend that at least like I'm seeing here in India and of course in US and also Southeast Asia and few other countries about in-app communities. And of course, I understand that creators and smaller brands, D2C brands might have a Slack or a Discord channel for building their community, or even WhatsApp group or WhatsApp channel, which was like recently launched. But do you think some organizations and businesses can think of community as within the product itself, as like the main offering of the product through in-app communities? What's your view on this?
I don't really have a view. My gut says, why? Like, why would you build an app or build it on top of an app when you can essentially just connect it, especially some like more robust platforms than like Slack or Discord, but you could connect it directly, so it's like an SSO login automatically from your in-app login.
Sorry to cut you, but let's say somebody already has an app and they have, let's say, 1 million users on the app, coming every day and just consuming, let's say, content or just those features, but they're not interacting with each other. Will an in-app community for an existing product help take the retentions higher or their monetization higher in some sense?
I mean, there's no way to know if it would. I think that it could, sure. I mean, like anything could in theory happen. Equally, I think it would go back to like the why. Like, do members on the app like want to connect with each other? If not, then like, why are you building something that members don't want? If members want like to connect with each other, but they want in-person events, why are you building an in-app community when all they want is the ability to connect with people who are like them, but on like the local level and in person? So I would say, like, if you are exploring something like that, really, again, like go back to the people who you want to ask and like learn from and build for and like with, and speak to them and speak to more. And sure enough, you're going to get a clear picture one way or the other. In terms of my personal preference, I think it would probably be a hard thing for me to imagine. I don't know too many companies that would really work well for something like that. And on top of, why would you almost like reinvent the wheel unless you're going to really redo the wheel? I don't know. So I would say that there are a handful of like factors, but it's an interesting idea. I will say overall, probably it's too early to tell if it'll be meaningful and successful or not. So we'll see how it all shapes up, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and the future will tell how this pans out. Talking about the future, what are some things, or let's say trends, that you see will happen in the community world in the next few years?
Yeah. I mean, one of my like favorite trends even right now that we're seeing is an insane focus on communities to support current customers and users over communities of practice.
Yeah,
That's really a big trend. And I'll go deeper into that. It's not just the idea of a community for that group of people, but it's also the idea of connecting them, like connecting community with your academy or education or university program with other resources in a real centralized connected experience. So it's super easy and frictionless, which goes back to my point earlier around like SSO logins. Like I'm a member or a user of some platforms. The experience is phenomenal with just like a simple SSO click from a menu. I can be right in their community and never do anything else than hit that one button. So if they've already built it and invested it, I think it like works well and it can be very successful that way. And as long as you're like continuously adding value and actually helping members of that community or your customers and users, then that's a big home run. And just keep doing it, double down on it, and invest more. It'll come back to really add significant value in the long term. Because community happens in a bunch of small moments over a long period of time. So give it time, resource it, nurture it, and then watch all the fruits of it come over the next like few years. You'll be amazed what'll happen.
yeah. And actually, I've also observed this about how community for like how it can be your support channel for all your users or members, and how they tie it up with a university, or let's say the education vertical also of the company. So this is something that I'm also observing, and I am totally aligned with you on this trend shaping up in the next few years as well. My last question, and this has actually nothing to be connected with what we have like spoken till now. It's just out of personal curiosity as to what is something that you believe that most of the other community leaders don't believe or don't agree with you on.
I don't think I have too many. I definitely have some hot takes, but I don't think that they're too hot to many community professionals. I think if I had to say like my spiciest community specific take for other community professionals, it'll probably be I actually like building communities on Slack. I'm a fan. I really like it. Built 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, something like that on Slack. So 5, 4, 5, maybe something like that. So I'm a big fan of it. Is the point. Really seeing it be successful. Some people aren't a fan, and I would say how I approach it is like, look, there are limitations to every platform. There is no perfect community platform. And if there is, again, slide into my DMs and like shoot your best shot. Maybe I'll check it out, maybe I won't, who knows? But Lord, like if there's actually a great all-in-one platform, it's the best kept secret probably in the entire community space. So I would say that like you are aware of the limitations of your platform, and then you actively choose how you're going to navigate that. Are you saying like, we're aware of an issue and we're okay doing nothing, and that's our position and we're going to live with that for X amount of time? Or are you saying there is a limitation, we are going to do X to solve for Y issue, And we're going to do that because we know that this is valuable to our members. And overall, it's going to be valuable to us as a company and long term to the community too, to start from the beginning. I mean, there are pretty clear things that are limitations of Slack. So I think that just being honest and upfront with yourself and anyone else you're building with about it and having those conversations helps you overcome like any of those challenges. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm a big fan of Slack. As I said, I know others aren't, and that's all good. But there are other platforms I would never touch that others are a fan of. So it goes both ways.
I'm actually, I love being a member on Slack communities, but when it comes about hosting communities like my own community, I would preferably go on a Discord or Facebook group, or maybe let's say WhatsApp as well, because Slack is just extremely expensive in the long run as your members increase. And that's my one biggest hesitation about building large scale communities on Slack.
So I'm going to take that because it's a common thing I hear, and I'm going to ask a question back. What you're really scared of, I think, is like losing losing Slack history of messages, not actually the member growth. And that's why you're talking about a paid community, right?
Yeah. Like they would not be able to access then after 90 days the messages or let's say videos or anything that was shared 90 days before.
So there are apps that like you can use to access those archives. After those, it's like one of those known limitations of Slack. And then you then are saying, we're going to actively ignore it and we're going to deal with it, and that's fine. Or you're saying, there is an issue, we're going to deal with it, and here are options A, B, C, and D. So I would say it's a very common reason why people don't like Slack, but I think it's exactly one of the reasons why I like it, is because there are so just clear like limitations, that one being an example, that then forces you to just be honest and say like, look, this is our reality.
Yeah.
This path or this path. There is no real middle here.
Yeah. I think I'm going to be more open-minded about Slack after hearing you. That's my biggest takeaway, or let's say learning from this conversation today, that I would explore and think about Slack when I have to build something next. But any closing thoughts before we end the conversation?
On that note, I would say why I also like Slack is because there's a more robust ecosystem of tools really around it than many of the other community platforms. Like there aren't tools outside of Facebook's own management tools for groups, for example. There's nothing. I don't really know anyone who's building on Facebook. But again, like I live more in like the professional and like B2B side of the world. So maybe in B2C, it's a great place and it's sunshine and rainbows, who knows? But it's not really a thing for me. But that's kind of what I love about Slack, is that there is an actual ecosystem, whereas other platforms, you're either stuck with what they build or the handful of potential platforms that they integrate with themselves, where Slack is just so open, it's easy to build a lot with it. And you can get pretty dangerous too.
Yeah, I think it has its pros and cons. And as I said, I'm going to be open-minded about exploring Slack when I'm hosting my next community. But thank you so much, Joel, for doing this. I think I have a very big takeaway from this, and I'm sure everybody who's going to listen to this and read about this conversation and just watch this, they're going to have too many takeaways and learnings as well. And of course, we'll link to your podcast series in the description of this episode, and also your LinkedIn, because you want a lot of people to DM you about all the things that we have talked about. So you're going to see some new DMs coming your way very, very soon.
You never know. I mean, you can shoot your shot, but there's a high bar. I'll I'll
Yeah.
put that warning out there. There's a high bar. Yep.
Super. I'm glad that I passed that high bar, and now we are doing this conversation after the LinkedIn DM.
Yep. Made it past that
Super.
step, so it's good.
Thank you so much, Joel, for your time. I think I had a wonderful time with doing this, and I hope everybody who's going to listen to this and watch this, they also have a wonderful time.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. Really appreciate it, and hope people who are watching or listening learned a handful of things, or at least one thing today, and are excited and feel good about like their community building journey after listening. So super excited
Yeah.
to be your guest. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that's very important. Like, just also feel proud about what you're building, and I just feel happy about what you're doing. I think that's a great note to end this conversation. But once again, thank you so much for doing this, Joel.